In the present system of things, all of us experience trials. Do you ever wonder whether Jehovah will act in your behalf? And if so, when? We can be certain that Jehovah will support us during our trials. Why? Because Jehovah's foremost attribute is an especially heartwarming quality, love. To learn about this quality, including how we can show it ourselves, let's examine the Bible account of Joseph. Joseph was born more than 3,700 years ago in Mesopotamia. His father was the patriarch Jacob, also known as Israel. Joseph had 10 half-brothers and one full brother, Benjamin. At a tender age, Joseph began to face adversity because of the jealousy of his 10 older brothers. Yet Joseph's trials led to the saving of his whole family from famine. More than that, as a result of his trials, we can receive everlasting blessings. I invite you to read along in your Bible as you listen to Genesis 37, verses 2 through 11.
When Joseph was 17 years old, the young man was tending the flock with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, the wives of his father. And Joseph brought a bad report about them to their father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his other sons, because he was the son of his old age, and he had a special robe made for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they began to hate him, and they could not speak peaceably to him. Later, Joseph had a dream and told it to his brothers, and they found further reason to hate him. He said to them,
"Please, listen to this dream that I had. There we were binding sheaves in the middle of the field when my sheaf got up and stood erect, and your sheaves encircled and bowed down to my sheaf."
His brothers said to him,
"Are you really going to make yourself king over us and dominate us?"
So they found another reason to hate him, because of his dreams and what he said. After that, he had still another dream, and he related it to his brothers.
"I have had another dream. This time, the sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me."
Then he related it to his father, as well as his brothers. And his father rebuked him and said to him,
"What is the meaning of this dream of yours? Am I, as well as your mother and your brothers, really going to come and bow down to the earth to you?"
And his brothers grew jealous of him, but his father kept the saying in mind.
Joseph's family find it difficult to accept the meaning of his dreams. Yet Jacob keeps the saying. That is, he keeps Joseph's dreams in mind. How so? He keeps thinking the matter over. Perhaps he realizes that his son's dreams are from Jehovah. Joseph's brothers, however, have a different reaction. Follow along in Genesis 37, 18 through 36.
Now they caught sight of him from a distance, and before he reached them, they began plotting against him to put him to death. So they said to one another,
"Look, here comes that dreamer."
Come now, let us kill him and pitch him into one of the water pits, and we will say that a vicious wild animal devoured him. Then let us see what will become of his dreams."
When Reuben heard this, he tried to rescue him from them. So he said,
"Let us not take his life.
Reuben said to them,
Do not shed blood. Throw him into this water pit in the wilderness, but do not harm him."
His purpose was to rescue him from them, in order to return him to his father. So as soon as Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped Joseph of his robe, the special robe that he wore, and they took him and threw him into the water pit. At the time, the pit was empty. There was no water in it. Then they sat down to eat. When they looked up, there was a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Their camels were carrying labdanum gum, balsam, and resinous bark, and they were on their way down to Egypt. At this, Judah said to his brothers,
What profit would there be if we killed our brother and covered over his blood? Come now, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and do not let our hand be upon him. After all, he is our brother, our flesh.
So they listened to their brother. And when the Midianite merchants were passing by, they lifted Joseph up out of the water pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. These men took Joseph into Egypt. Later, when Reuben returned to the water pit and saw that Joseph was not in the water pit, he ripped his garments apart. When he returned to his brothers, he exclaimed,
The child is gone. And what am I going to do?
So they took Joseph's robe and slaughtered a male goat and dipped the robe in the blood. After that, they sent the special robe to their father and said,
This is what we found. Please examine whether this is your son's robe or not.
Then he examined it and exclaimed,
It is my son's robe. A vicious wild animal must have devoured him. Joseph is surely torn to pieces.
With that, Jacob ripped his garments apart and put sackcloth around his waist and mourned his son for many days. And all his sons and all his daughters kept trying to comfort him, but he kept refusing to take comfort, saying,
I will go down into the grave, mourning my son.
And his father continued weeping for him. Now the Midianites sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, a court official of Pharaoh and the chief of the guard.
What a drastic change! From favorite son to lowly slave. Joseph's brothers not only failed to show loyal love to him, but they failed to show love to their father, Jacob, and most important, to their heavenly Father, Jehovah. Faithful servants of Jehovah are not always shielded from injustice. At times, injustice may befall us even at the hands of a fellow believer. Are you in the middle of a trial like that? Actually, your trial gives you a unique opportunity to prove your love for Jehovah. How so? Consider how Joseph responded to his trial. Note what Genesis 39, verses 1 through 23 says.
Now Joseph was taken down to Egypt, and an Egyptian named Potiphar, a court official of Pharaoh and chief of the guard, bought him from the Ishmaelites, who had taken him down there. But Jehovah was with Joseph. As a result, he became successful and was put over the house of his master, the Egyptian. And his master saw that Jehovah was with him, and that Jehovah was making everything that he did successful. Joseph kept finding favor in his eyes, and he became his personal attendant. So he appointed him over his house, and he put him in charge of all that was his. From the time he appointed him over his house and in charge of all that was his, Jehovah kept blessing the house of the Egyptian because of Joseph. And Jehovah's blessing came to be on all that he had, in the house and in the field. He eventually left everything that was his in Joseph's care, and he gave no thought to anything except the food he was eating. Moreover, Joseph grew to be well-built and handsome. Now after these things, the wife of his master began to cast her eyes on Joseph and say,
Lie down with me.
But he refused and said to his master's wife,
Here my master does not know what is with me in the house, and he has entrusted everything he has into my care. There is no one greater in this house than I am, and he has not withheld from me anything at all except you, because you are his wife. So how could I commit this great badness and actually sin against God?
So day after day she spoke to Joseph, but he never consented to lie with her or to remain with her. But on one of the days when he went into the house to do his work, none of the household servants were in the house. Then she grabbed hold of him by his garment and said,
Lie down with me.
But he left his garment in her hand and fled outside. As soon as she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and had fled outside, she began to cry out to the men of her house and to say to them,
Look! He brought to us this Hebrew man to make us a laughingstock. He came to me to lie down with me, but I began to cry out at the top of my voice. Then as soon as he heard me raising my voice and screaming, he left his garment beside me and fled outside.
After that, she laid his garment beside her until his master came to his house. Then she told him the same thing, saying,
The Hebrew servant whom you brought to us came to me to make me a laughingstock. But as soon as I raised my voice and began to scream, he left his garment beside me and fled outside.
As soon as his master heard the words his wife spoke to him, saying, These are the things your servant did to me, his anger blazed. So Joseph's master took him and gave him over to the prison, the place where the prisoners of the king were kept under arrest, and he remained there in the prison. But Jehovah continued with Joseph and kept showing loyal love to him and granting him favor in the eyes of the chief officer of the prison. So the chief officer of the prison put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners in the prison, and everything that they were doing there, he was the one having it done. The chief officer of the prison was looking after absolutely nothing that was in Joseph's care, for Jehovah was with Joseph, and Jehovah made whatever he did successful.
Joseph remains under Jehovah's watchful care, and Jehovah makes whatever Joseph does successful. Why is Jehovah so attached to Joseph? Because Joseph maintains unshakable love for God. Joseph's experience teaches us that if we maintain our love for Jehovah, he will not abandon us. Rather, he will provide just what we need at the right time so that we may endure. Returning to Joseph's story, we find he's assigned to care for two special prisoners, Pharaoh's personal cupbearer and his chief baker. One night, they each have a puzzling dream. Jehovah enables Joseph to interpret those dreams accurately, and the dreams are fulfilled. Notice that at Genesis 40, verse 14, Joseph entreats the cupbearer with the words, "You must remember me when things go well with you. Please show me loyal love and mention me to Pharaoh in order to get me out of this place." But the cupbearer forgets all about Joseph. Eventually, Pharaoh himself has two baffling dreams, one of plump cattle eaten by skinny ones, and the other of choice ears of grain swallowed by shriveled ones. None of the priests and wise men in Egypt were able to interpret these dreams. Finally, the cupbearer tells Pharaoh about Joseph's amazing ability to interpret dreams. Joseph is quickly summoned from prison. As we resume our reading from Genesis 41, verse 25, Joseph, now 30 years old, is standing before the king.
Then Joseph said to Pharaoh,
The dreams of Pharaoh are one and the same. The true God has told to Pharaoh what he will do. The 7 good cows are 7 years. Likewise, the 7 good ears of grain are 7 years. The dreams are one and the same. The 7 skinny and bad cows that came up after them are 7 years. And the 7 empty ears of grain scorched by the east wind will prove to be 7 years of famine. This is just as I told to Pharaoh. The true God has caused Pharaoh to see what he will do. There are to be 7 years of great abundance in all the land of Egypt. But 7 years of famine will certainly arise after them, and all the abundance in the land of Egypt will certainly be forgotten, and the famine will exhaust the land. And the previous abundance in the land will not be remembered because of the famine afterward, for it will be very severe. The dream was given twice to Pharaoh, because the matter has been firmly established by the true God, and the true God will soon carry it out.
Joseph lays out a detailed strategy to deal with the coming famine. Pharaoh is so pleased with Joseph's interpretation and his sound advice that he installs Joseph as ruler over all Egypt, second only to himself. 8 years later, famine dominates the region. Joseph's family suffers too. Jacob directs his sons to try to buy food in Egypt. Jacob's 10 oldest sons leave for Egypt. However, his youngest, Benjamin, stays safely at home. The 10 brothers meet Joseph and bow down to him, fulfilling Joseph's dream from years earlier. Joseph recognizes his brothers, but they don't recognize him. He speaks to them only in Egyptian through an interpreter and keeps his true identity secret. Joseph now has a decision to make. Will he use his authority to make life hard for his brothers? Will he dismiss them indifferently, feeling that they don't deserve his help? Or will he look for any opening to reconcile with them? Will he imitate Jehovah's loyal love? What would you have done? Joseph wants to know if their attitude has changed or if they're still filled with hatred and envy. Thus, he accuses them of being spies, telling them he'll keep their brother Simeon under arrest until they return with Benjamin. Let's read Genesis 42, verses 21 through 24.
We are surely being punished on account of our brother, because we saw his distress when he begged us to show compassion, but we did not listen. That is why this distress has come upon us.
Then Reuben answered them,
Did I not say to you, do not sin against the child? But you would not listen. Now his blood is certainly being asked back.
But they did not know that Joseph understood, for there was an interpreter between them. So he turned away from them and began to weep. When he returned and spoke to them again, he took Simeon from them and bound him before their eyes.
Reuben expresses remorse over their mistreatment of Joseph. But are Reuben and his brothers genuinely repentant? To find out, Joseph demands that his brothers return to Canaan and then bring Benjamin, their youngest brother, to Egypt. How does Jacob respond to the demand that Benjamin be brought to Egypt? Genesis 42, verses 36 and 37 answers.
It is I you have bereaved. Joseph is no more, and Simeon is no more, and you are going to take Benjamin? It is upon me that all these things have come.
But Reuben said to his father,
You may put to death my own 2 sons if I do not bring him back to you. Give him over to my care, and I will return him to you.
Jacob is adamant. He will not allow Benjamin out of his sight. However, by the 2nd year of the famine, the food supplies run out at home for Jacob and his household. Will Jacob now be persuaded to let Benjamin join his brothers in their trek back to Egypt for more food supplies? Let's find out by reading Genesis 43, verses 8 through 10, 13, and 14.
Judah then urged Israel his father,
Send the boy with me, and let us go on our way, so that we may live and not die, we and you and our children. I will be a guarantee for his safety. You may hold me responsible. If I fail to return him to you and present him to you, I will have sinned against you for all time. But if we had not delayed, we could have been there and back twice by now."
Take your brother and go. Return to the man. May God Almighty grant you pity from the man, so that he may release to you your other brother in Benjamin. But as for me, if I must be bereaved, I will be bereaved.
Although earlier Judah had displayed insensitivity toward his father's favored son Joseph, now he's willing to take full responsibility for his father's beloved son Benjamin. So Jacob permits his sons to return to Egypt, bringing Joseph a large gift. Let's continue reading Genesis 43, verses 26 through 30.
When Joseph went into the house, they brought their gift to him into the house and prostrated themselves to him to the ground.
"How is your aged father of whom you have spoken? Is he still alive?"
To this they said,
Your servant, our father, is well. He is still alive.
Then they bowed down and prostrated themselves. When he looked up and saw Benjamin his brother, the son of his mother, he said,
"Is this your brother, the youngest one of whom you have spoken to me?"
He added,
"May God show you his favor, my son."
Joseph then hurried out because he was overcome with emotion for his brother, and he looked for a place to weep. So he went into a private room and gave way to tears there.
Joseph wants to discern his brother's true feelings, so he tests them. How? Joseph has his servants fill each of his brother's bags with food. Secretly, he also has his special silver cup slipped into Benjamin's bag. After they all leave and have traveled a short distance on the road, Joseph sends his servants after them. When they catch up with them, the servants demand, "Why have you stolen our master's silver cup?" Joseph's brothers strongly deny any wrongdoing and add, "If you find the cup with any one of us, let that person be killed." So the servants search through all the bags, and they find the cup in Benjamin's bag. The brothers show their grief by ripping their garments apart. Perplexed, they all return with Benjamin to Joseph's house. Now, having fallen to the ground before Joseph, Judah says, "The true God has found out the error of your slaves. We are now slaves to my master." Joseph, continuing his test, replies sternly, "As for the rest of you, return home, but Benjamin must stay here as my slave." Judah moans, "If I fail to bring Benjamin back, my father will surely die, and I will have sinned against him forever." Judah is unwilling to cause his father the pain of losing another favored son, so he volunteers to become a slave in place of Benjamin. Let's read of Joseph's emotional reaction at Genesis 45, verses 1 through 15.
At this, Joseph could no longer control himself before all his attendants. So he cried out,
"Have everyone leave me."
No one else stayed with him, while Joseph made himself known to his brothers. Then he began to weep so loudly that the Egyptians heard it, and Pharaoh's house heard it. Finally, Joseph said to his brothers,
"I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?"
But his brothers were unable to answer him at all, because they were astonished on account of him. So Joseph said to his brothers,
"Come close to me, please."
With that, they came close to him. Then he said,
"I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. But now, do not be upset, and do not reproach one another because you sold me here. Because God has sent me ahead of you for the preservation of life. This is the 2nd year of the famine in the land, and there are yet 5 years in which there will be no plowing or harvest. But God sent me ahead of you in order to preserve for you a remnant on the earth and to keep you alive by a great deliverance. So then, it was not you who sent me here, but it was the true God, in order to appoint me as chief advisor to Pharaoh and lord for all his house and ruler over all the land of Egypt. Return quickly to my father, and you must say to him, 'This is what your son Joseph has said. God has appointed me lord over all Egypt. Come down to me, do not delay. You must dwell in the land of Goshen, where you will be near me, you, your sons, your grandsons, your flocks, your herds, and everything you have. I will supply you with food there, for there are yet 5 years of famine. Otherwise you and your house and everything you have will come to poverty. You and my brother Benjamin can now see with your own eyes that I am really the one speaking to you. So you must tell my father about all my glory in Egypt and everything you have seen. Now hurry and bring my father down here.'
Then he embraced his brother Benjamin and gave way to weeping, and Benjamin wept with his arms around his neck, and he kissed all his brothers and wept over them.
Accordingly, Jacob, with about 70 of his family, moves down to Egypt. Pharaoh gives them the land of Goshen to dwell in. For 215 years, Jacob's descendants live in Egypt until the day when all 3 million or more of them pass between the walls of the parted Red Sea and eventually take possession of the Promised Land. Jehovah used Joseph to preserve the line of descent leading to the Messiah. What can the story of Joseph teach us? No matter what situation he faced, Joseph showed loyal love to Jehovah. For years he was battered by one trial after another, but he never became resentful. Today, we may have little control over the trials we face in this imperfect system, but we can control our reaction to them. We refuse to become embittered against Jehovah. We love Jehovah, and we are determined to prove our love by rejecting any conduct that would hurt him. Later, when Joseph's circumstances changed, he showed loyal love to his family, despite his brother's unjust treatment. In fact, Joseph's loyal love toward his family helped to fulfill a prophecy. In the days of Joseph's great-grandfather Abraham, Jehovah had set the precise time to deliver his people, exactly 430 years later. If Joseph had not shown loyal love toward his family, how would that prophecy have been fulfilled? Obviously, our loyal love for our brothers matters to Jehovah. So if you are ever hurt by your spiritual brother, reject the temptation to spread negative talk about him or to hurt him in kind. Do whatever is necessary to restore peace. After all, our brothers are loved by Jehovah. They deserve our loyal love too. The finest example of loyal love in this account is Jehovah. Joseph was abandoned by his family, slandered by his employer's wife, and finally thrown into prison. But Jehovah continued with Joseph and kept showing loyal love to him. Why? He saw that Joseph remained loyal, so he acted in loyalty toward Joseph. Jehovah's treatment of Joseph was also an expression of loyal love toward the nation of Israel. By using Joseph to preserve his family, Jehovah preserved the line of the Messiah and ensured that his promise to deliver the Israelites was fulfilled right on time. Isn't that reassuring? Imperfect humans may let you down. You may face ridicule or even slander, or you may be treated unjustly. But if you remain loyal, Jehovah will never abandon you. He never forgot Joseph, and he will not forget any of his loyal servants today. Stick close to Jehovah, and he will continue showing loyal love to you.